你好，我叫何雪莉. My name is Shelley Drake Hawks, and I'd like to thank Museum Director Chen Yongyi for inviting me to the conference. I am sorry I cannot be there in person. And I also would like to thank Pan Kai, whom I've had the honor to meet several times. And I really admire what he's done in art education and in his painting, really following in the footsteps of his distinguished father, Pan Tianshou. So let me share my slides. So on his paintings, Pan Tianshou used several name seals linking his finger painting with Chan Buddhist philosophy. Yizhi Chan, one finger Chan, and Zhito Chan, finger Chan. So Chan refers to meditation, but it's come to mean an entire set of teaching methods to stir insight through a dialogue between teacher and student. And often this teaching begins with a shock to disrupt one's conventional way of seeing, to invite a more profound way of seeing. And I believe that some of Pan's finger paintings do just that. They are a form of spiritual teaching. Now, my idea for focusing on Pan's Buddhist beliefs as a lens for understanding his finger painting was inspired by art historian Yang Suliang, who proposed in his dissertation that the one finger Chan seal may refer to a story about a Chan monk back in the 9th century, who, when asked to explain Buddhism, held up one finger. And perhaps he meant to convey something like the oneness of all things, complete interconnectedness, a breaking down of all distinctions between ourselves and others. Perhaps he meant to point to one Buddhist truth, the teaching about emptiness at the core of existence. This aligns with the Buddhist appreciation for eliminating desires and illusions as the path to enlightenment. And in Chan Buddhism, there is a great skepticism about the capacity of words to explain ultimate truths. Rather, it's through gestures and imagery that a teacher may lead a student to imagine the invisible. So here I've taken a photo I found on Twitter of something called the one finger stand. And that in the Shaolin tradition of martial arts, a few monks acquired this ability to support their entire body weight on one finger, the so-called one finger stand. And this rare feat requires years of training, mental focus, and physical strength. Now, in a figurative sense, the one finger stand represents an individual whose integrity and talent hold up despite unusual societal pressure. So Pan Tianshou's public advocacy of Chinese painting and calligraphy at a time when many believed it should be left to die out shows that he had this kind of discipline and forbearance. In a seminal poem, Han referred to himself as an old man whose finger strength carries the cauldron. Now, the scholar Deng Bai has written that this poem illuminates Pan's thinking about his finger painting. Bronze cauldrons like this one from the Shanghai Museum were large and very heavy vessels used to serve food for the ancestors at ceremonies. They were passed from generation to generation as signifiers of continuity. Thus, for Pan to claim that his finger strength carries the cauldron suggests that he is the steward of a precious art form, and that he tasked his finger to bear the weight shows the importance he attached to finger painting. Now, since brushwork is so fundamental to Chinese painting, and Pan himself was very accomplished using the brush, he faced constant questioning why he practiced finger painting. That is, using one finger or a fingernail or your whole hand rather than a brush to spread the ink. Pan made it clear that he did not advocate abandoning the brush. Finger painting was a side path, not the main road, and he discouraged anyone from following his lead until they became skilled in the fundamentals of brushwork. And though his finger paintings increased late in life, they comprise about 1/4 of his works. He continued to paint with a brush when it matched his needs. Even on his finger paintings, he wrote inscriptions with a brush and often applied color with a brush. So Pan explained that painting with fingers is quite a different experience than using a brush. The fingers do not hold the ink in reserve like the nib of a brush. It drips, it puddles, it abruptly runs dry. But Pan liked the unruliness of finger painting. So why did he pursue finger painting? For Pan, the finger was a living tool. It was more immediate, it was more flexible. It was unpretentious and natural. It allowed him to master something novel, yet was still grounded in Chinese tradition. Previous Chinese painters, like Gao Qi several centuries before, had also used fingers to paint. Since finger painting is prone to accidental drips, the artist is not fully in control, but enveloped in a fluid, generative process. And this bears similarity to Wu Wei in Taoism, and indeed Chan Buddhism very much is informed by aspects of Taoism. Finger painting achieves the appearance of strangeness, an aesthetic which very well matches the iconoclastic spirit of Chan Buddhism. So any talk of Pan's Buddhist beliefs must start with his spiritual mentor, Li Shutong, who was his art teacher when Pan attended the Teachers College in 1915. And Li was very important introducing Western art methods into China. He had studied in Japan. But he surprised everyone in the school when he left to become a monk in 1918. And Pan admired him so much that Pan went to him and asked to be his disciple and follow him to become a monk. But Li said, no, you really need to pursue your path to become a great artist. But Pan would continue to really think of Li as an example. And later, when Pan lived in Shanghai in the 1920s, he had the good fortune to meet one of China's most acclaimed living masters, Wu Changshuo, who at that time was 50 years older than Pan, but recognized Pan's talent. But interestingly, in an inscription, he urged Pan not to walk too fast. He really thought that Pan was experimenting with some heterodox practices, including finger painting, and Wu cautioned him. So I think by this we can remember that Pan was really a rebel as well as a preserver of tradition. And interestingly, Pan Tianshou and his friend Zhu Wenyun collaborated to create this painting honoring Wu Changshuo on his 80th birthday, portraying him as the Chan patriarch Bodhidharma. And Zhu painted Wu's face very realistically using charcoal, but it was Pan who added that expressive brushwork, the red monk's robe, and the black prayer mat. Now, Wu was not a monk. He did keep an altar with a Buddha statue, and he practiced meditation. But I think what we see here is that Pan is already associating innovation and artistry with the wisdom of Chan Buddhism. Now, during his early and middle years, Pan regularly painted Buddhist subjects, like this one in 1948 called Monk Reading the Sutra. And when he painted this, Pan was enjoying a very creative year because he was no longer president of the National Art Academy as he had been earlier during the war. And now he had time to focus on painting, and he did many finger paintings. And the monk pictured here is probably Bodhidharma, the founder of Chan Buddhism, typically portrayed with a bald head, an unkempt beard, and ornamental earrings. The monk's two fingers occupied the center of this finger painting, signaling their spiritual and artistic importance. The small red circular object between the two fingers is possibly a pomegranate seed, although another interpreter has identified it as a prayer bead. Circles are very important symbols in Buddhism. According to Dietrich Seckel, a simple empty circle represents the highest level of Chan insight. A circle is a wide open non-form that can absorb all yet remain free and untainted. In this painting, note the oval name seal on the right edge of the painting, the monk's hoop earring, and the large dots of ink dripped apparently randomly on his robe and on the open book of scripture. And though we see the monk in the picture, note that it's only a partial view. Typical of Chan portraiture, the whole picture of a spiritual being is left to develop in one's imagination. And his profiled figure looks like a rock, a mountain, encouraging us to consider the oneness between person and earth. And his gaze is internally focused, facing up with no glance at the sutra. His forehead and nose point to the other side of the paper where there is nothing, and his fingers point straight up to more nothingness. We are left with a paradox about reading. The book is laid open, and yet the enlightened mind and fingers do not attend to it. So Pan's image resonates with the Chan insistence on going beyond language to discover truths. Now, in a 1947 article, Buddhism and Chinese Painting, Pan argued that Chan Buddhism was really the critical driver of innovation in Chinese painting. He said it had pushed Chinese painting toward a plain and bare aesthetic. He said Chan stood for simplicity and freedom from rules. And he said Chan found pure mirrors for contemplation in birds, flowers, rocks, and other natural phenomena. And among Pan's heroes in history were the 17th century Chan monk painters, Shi Tao and Bada Shanren. And Pan tied their innovation directly to Chan Buddhism. He said, every stroke and ink dot of theirs came from the prayer mat. So Shi Tao is one of the most famous Chinese painters, and he brought new freedom to Chinese painting. Note here this very expressive line and these dots of color. Now he's using a brush. This is not finger painting. And Shi Tao was a rebel. He rebelled against the convention of always following the style of a previous master. He said, "The whiskers and eyebrows of the ancients cannot grow on my face. I have my own whiskers and eyebrows." And this painting dates to 1680, so very early. And he was a very versatile painter. Shurtao sometimes painted in a very minimalistic style like this, leaving a refreshing amount of blank space in the painting. We see the scholar moving through the water at great speed, the strings of his hat flying in the breeze. He glides through emptiness, immersed in oneness. And perhaps this is an illustration of Shurtao's concept called the one stroke. Shurtao was a theorist, not just a painter, and Pan would also be a theorist and a practicing painter. But Pan reserved the highest praise for Badashanren. Now, Shurtao and Badashanren were related to each other. They were both members of the Ming royal family who had survived the transfer to Qing rule by joining the Chan Buddhist community and living in the mountains. And both were radical innovators. Bada put emphasis on minimalism. Just a few lines from his brush invested a fish or a melon with great liveliness. Now, Pan was very interested in Bada's techniques and sometimes used similar subject matter, like this cat, and also a very minimalist style. But this is a finger painting. So Pan is definitely creating his own original take. And note the blank space in this very tall and narrow painting. And the cat's rock-like body looks very circular if you follow the sweep up and around its back and down through its tail. So I'll spend the final part of my talk looking in depth at 3 finger paintings. And I want to propose thinking of them as like a visual koan or gong'an. That means a puzzling, paradoxical teaching. And I propose a 3-step method. First, to notice the strangeness of the painting. And that purpose is to disrupt our conventional thinking. And then secondly, look for an indication of the cosmic void, the emptiness, the symbol for enlightenment. And then finally, look for an invitation to step into the world of the painting, to begin one's own spiritual journey. So in this 1964 finger painting called Imposing Gaze, Pan created a puzzle, a very tall rock shaped like a triangle, balanced on its tip, with 2 large vultures perched on top, tilted in opposite directions. The vulture in the foreground leans way over. Its beak and eyes follow a steep waterfall down into the ravine below. What is the vulture looking at? Though our gaze is obstructed by the cliff and vegetation, we infer that there's a pool at the waterfall's base, and we see a kind of rising mist. The vulture's gaze into the mysterious void suggests that he has spotted some target, and its wings will soon flutter. According to Helmut Brinker, an authority on Japanese Zen painting, a bird that has spotted its prey may mean a seeker whose spirit sees the goal of enlightenment in immediate reach. We know that Pan painted eagles and vultures as symbols of spiritual power. He admired their fierce character and their ability to fly high and live on peaks. and that the nearest vulture looks down instead of out into the distance, as the background vulture does, suggests that enlightenment is the result of looking underfoot at humble things. So the viewer of this 11-foot tall painting looks towards the mist from the bottom of the cliff. From ground level, the cosmic void seems just steps away, though it's still hidden. A few small flowers stand at the edge with direct access to the refreshing view. This painting seems to hint that spiritual insight is near at hand and accessible to all, including those humble wildflowers facing the emptiness. And like a Chan teaching, this painting awakens us with shock tactics. The vulture's sharp beak, his unkempt feathers, and the waterfall's very long drop-off do not soothe so much as startle. And in his essay on finger painting, Pan explained that when drawing very long lines, like in this waterfall, if you draw it with a finger, it requires stopping and starting, connecting short lines to long lines. A very troublesome and irritating process, he said. The fingers operate with a slight carelessness, but they leave a record that's both dazzling and strange. And as we look at his waterfall, it really does give us that sense of moving water. Next, we move to an extremely horizontal painting, a 12-foot wide painting of a water buffalo in a pond. And in this one, he placed his finger Chan seal at the very center of the painting on a rock behind the buffalo. So I think it's a Chan interpretation is certainly possible here. So in Chan literature, Niu, the buffalo or the ox, typically appear in a series instructing believers how to discipline their mind through meditation. The ox herding parable's 10 steps illustrate the path toward enlightenment. The buffalo stands for one's own wandering consciousness, lost to begin with, eventually discovered, caught with a rope, herded and ridden until both the ox and then the person are forgotten and vanish. In this painting, this animal stands at ground level, looking directly at the viewer as it refreshes itself. Is this the telling moment just after our wandering consciousness has been discovered? It seems the implied seeker of the buffalo, that is, the viewer, is also in the water. The buffalo's striking eyes show it to be complex and alive. Despite its physical strength, this fearsome animal seems tranquil already. Perhaps it's ready to serve. It's so like us. We should not see it as a separate entity. Yet the seeker must catch hold of the buffalo and embrace it as a true self, unwinding the rope from its horn and leading it by the nose ring ashore. Like the mist-filled pool, only a few paces from the viewer in the previous painting, this buffalo's soulful eyes invite the viewer to step into the painting, to initiate spiritual cultivation. And in this case, the cosmic void may only be inferred, not indicated, since to reach it, one must lead the buffalo out of the water. Or perhaps we see a suggestion of emptiness in the blank space on the left side of the buffalo. And at Dazu Cave in Sichuan province, there are carvings of the ox herd parable. And this is the final panel symbolizing complete enlightenment after the ox and the herd boy have vanished. And it shows a full moon over a lotus flower. And the poem on the tablet reads, "Man and ox are out of sight. They are long gone without a trace. A bright moon coldly shines. If you ask me the meaning of this, then behold the wild flowers." In Pan's last finger painting, "The Majestic Plum Blossoms in Moonlight," we see finger painting at its most expressive. Just as the Cultural Revolution was emerging during the first half of 1966, he painted this immense painting, 6 by 5 feet, using his finger and his fingernail, expressing his resolve to resist the extreme policies already hindering his art school. Pan depicted a partial view of an ancient plum tree raising one thick and gnarled branch toward moonlight. He gave the tree strong human characteristics. Its coiled branch resembles an arm, its roots a knee and a shin, and its trunk the torso and weathered complexion of an old man. Though snow is present, a few blossoms have emerged. The cluster at the top, in dark ink, floats in the night air, weighing heavily on the long diagonal branch supporting it. Pan's anguish at political trends affecting art during early 1966 surely register in this scene, yet a Chan interpretation is also fitting, since his one-finger Chan seal appears in the lower right corner. Flowers play an integral role in Chan teaching. At the moment of transmission, Siddhartha is said to have silently held up a single flower. Only one disciple smiled, demonstrating his understanding. Plum flowers represent the highest form of purity and the most resilient. Their appearance signals the moment of transmission between a wise elder and a student. Recounting the words of his Chinese teacher, the Japanese monk Dogen said, "When Siddhartha lost his ordinary sight and attained enlightenment, one branch of a plum tree bloomed in the snow." As we saw in the carving at Dazhu, a full moon symbolizes enlightenment. The quiet, cool light of this luminous circle opens the eye to the essential, its round shape like a face, one's own countenance before birth, identical to the Buddha nature. Pointing to the moon symbolizes a quest for complete truth. The clouds moving across the moon's face in Pan's painting probably refer to impending political troubles. However, clouds also suggest the moon's elusiveness, a mysterious void which is both there and not there. As we look at this detail from the bottom of the painting, where incidentally we find his one-finger Chan seal there in the lower right corner, let's imagine Pan walking around the large paper in his stocking feet, bending down to spread ink with his finger from a bowl of ink and color. And like Shertow's rock cliff, the roots of Pan's plum tree surge with vitality and emotion. Both artists deploy dots in a way that suggests tears as well as rain and snow. Now, on this painting, there is an inscription, and many of Pan's paintings do not have inscriptions, but this one does. Referring to the plum tree, the poem reads, "Its energy joins with snow from Yin and Zhou dynasties. Heaven produced its body of iron and stone. Though 10,000 flowers remain quiet, this solitary beauty raises one branch towards spring." So, what insights might we gain This ironstone branch still holds blossoms and points to the moon, the cosmic void. Perhaps we are asked to join Pan in holding up Chan Buddhist spirituality and the treasure of Chinese painting. Pan's final paintings on immense sheets of paper have an urgency and boldness, an iconoclastic spirit that bears comparison with Asian modernists. For example, Japanese abstract expressionist Kazuo Shiraga did these dramatic foot paintings in the 1950s. Pan might have known of the Gutai movement, a group of artists determined to usher in a new era, using their bodies rather than paintbrushes and taking paintings off the wall and onto the floor. Gutai means concreteness, composed of the characters for tool and body. And according to the Gutai artists, the artist's spirit imparts life into the paint, creating a scream of material. So too, Pan's last painting allows the materials of art to cry out at humanity's predicament. We hear it cry only in our imagination, and it's made more poignant by the quiet of the other flowers described in the inscription. And we'll end with Huang Fabang's wonderful portrait of Pan standing in front of his carved name seal. Pan left a powerful legacy. His finger paintings satisfied his strong urge for experimentation and his respect for materials, allowing ink to take its natural course. In following Chan monk innovators, Pan continued an Asian tradition of modernism, one which arguably started many centuries earlier in Asia than it did in Europe. Thank you very much.